Let's Talk Small Business, the real talk, no BS podcast for business owners and entrepreneurs who want to grow and actually enjoy the ride. I'm Mitchell Wilson. Let's get into it. Juliet, welcome to the podcast, Let's Talk Business. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Yes. So a little bit about yourself. I've got noted down. You're the Principal of Quinovic Nelson. I believe you've been doing that for over 20 years now. So I'm sure you've been through many, many markets. I'm really keen to hear about, I guess, your business journey, maybe what's kept you here. And also, I know you've always had some other ideas or things boiling in the background along the way of your journey. So here we are today. Juliet, welcome once again. Where did it all start for you in terms of your career, maybe even before you got into business?
No, good question. I started in banking, legal and banking. So my journey started here in Nelson. I decided I wanted to work in a legal practice. So my journey started at 17 years of age. I door knocked every single legal office in Nelson every single week, asking if they had any roles available, office junior roles available. And finally, after 3 weeks, someone took pity on me, and a gentleman by the name of John Smith, and in those days it was Hunter Smith & Co., employed me as an office junior. And whilst in the employ of Hunter Smith & Co. in those days, I did a legal execs course, and I started to do all of the work for a company called Merrick Finance, all of the documentation work for Merrick Finance.
Yeah.
And eventually Merrick Finance, after 7 years, headhunted me, and I went to work for Merrick Finance as a financial services representative in the Nelson-Marlborough region.
Now, just getting back there for a second, you door knocked like for weeks and weeks to get a job. Like, were other people doing this, or was that like, you should have been a salesperson?
Yeah, possibly, which is why I guess that's the career that I've ended up really being in, sales and service. But yeah, no, I did it for 3 weeks. As I say, the only way to do it is to make yourself known, and I guess you've got to be committed. And I really wanted to do law. I was, in hindsight, I really actually wish I'd gone and done a law degree, but anyway, it is what it is now, and I ended up moving forward in the financial services sector. So, yeah, not many people do that now, and I think it's going to be difficult for young kids coming into the workforce because a lot of them feel like things are going to be laid out for them on a plate, and we all know that's not going to be the case. It's going to be difficult for them. So I moved across to Merrick Finance in Nelson, and I'd travel to Blenheim every week as the financial services rep, looking at lending and investment opportunities for clients. And then after that, I moved to Wellington, my first foray out of the little Nelson village. And I went to work for a company called NZI Finance in Wellington. And that was a great time, learnt a lot. NZI Finance were really heavily involved in training their staff. And I was fortunate enough to do a number of David Foreman courses on sales techniques, negotiation, those sorts of things, invaluable. I was on a Young Achievers program at NZI Finance, and after NZI Finance, gosh, I'm going through the history books now, I went and joined a company called ANZ McCorn. And ANZ McCorn was a team in the bank that sat outside the bank in specialised services. And the role that I took on was a job called the Mortgage Securitisation Manager. So in essence, and in simplistic terms, what we used to do is we used to go out and lend money to organisations in million-dollar chunks, and we'd fund them into commercial properties, developments, and then we'd parcel those mortgages together and sell them on the bond market. And we had a AAA rating in that market, and we sold those investments that were underwritten in the UK. And for quite some time, we were the most profitable division of the ANZ banking group.
Hey, I don't know much about this, but have you seen the movie The Big Short?
No,
which is all about in America when everything collapsed,
Oh,
this is
yep,
what they
yep.
were doing. They were
Penny
taking
Adams, and
all the
yeah.
securities, bundling them, selling them, but their rating wasn't necessarily AAA when they thought it was. So, yeah, really interesting.
It's great because it gave large entities, particularly superannuation funds and those sorts of things, it gave them exposure to the New Zealand property market. But because it was underwritten, it was sort of all care, no responsibility. So they got the capital gains growth,
Mm.
and it was underwritten if there were ever any issues. And as I say, we were AAA rated, so great product. So I spent quite a few years there. And then a new technology hit the market in New Zealand, and it was a little-known technology, but it was called FPOS. And
Huh?
ANZ Bank owned their own FPOS entity in terms of the processing end of it,
Yeah.
whereas all the other major banks in New Zealand had a co-joined entity that ran their transactional process. So we could control our own destiny a lot better than a lot of the other banks. And I became the key account manager of ANZ Bank for electronic banking services.
Do you remember
Based
what year FPOS sort of really came into New Zealand?
Oh, that's going back. Oh, early 2000s.
Yeah, because I do remember using my FPOS card, and then I remember also going to America, and I worked there, and I got given a card, and of course I went into a shop to buy shoes, and I just handed over my card like I usually wouldn't in a shop, and they just looked at me weirdly, and I'm like, I just want to buy the shoes on my card, and they were, I don't know what you're talking about. Go to the ATM machine and pull some cash out. So obviously we were a little bit ahead than then at the time. Yeah.
Well, actually, that's quite true. We were a lot ahead. New Zealand is such an ideal entity to run pilots for any new technology like that because it's such a small entity, and you can control the narrative a lot more in terms of and outcomes a lot more. So New Zealand was always a leader in technology, as it seems to be today. Technology is certainly a key area of investment and a key area of the New Zealand government for investment and promotion. So FPOS was an interesting journey because it was so futuristic, and in those days the average transaction size was $60 per transaction, and you weren't able to use FPOS for gambling, purchasing lotto tickets or anything like that, but you also weren't able to use FPOS for purchasing liquor or alcohol.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it's obviously significantly different in today's market, and it's such a well accepted form of transactional banking. But great journey, really enjoyed it. I was responsible for getting FPOS into McDonald's, FPOS into, in those days, Decca, and BP. So a lot of key accounts that we managed, and we had to come up with some really unusual mechanisms to utilise FPOS. For example, even today, the little paddle where the FPOS transaction comes out of the McDonald's window for you to be able to transact, not quite the same as being in a normal retail environment. So after that, I then became the North Island manager for electronic banking services. So I ran a team of 7 or 8 individuals who were responsible for electronic banking services throughout the upper North Island to mid North Island. And that was working through all the retailers, all the entities that had an electronic banking service, and obviously dealing with the manufacturers of those electronic terminals as well.
I'm really just, I will probably get to the end of this journey, but can you think back to when you started? And nowadays, I guess past COVID, there were some places that would not take cash and that were solely cashless transactions. Like when you were starting this up, was there ever the discussion that this is the future and there will be no cash?
No, it wasn't that. There was no real discussion on that front. It was more the fact of making taking the cost out of transactional banking. You know, when you're dealing with small amounts, FPOS was always seen as going to be a low cash transactional payment mechanism, not like it is today. Everyone pays with FPOS, and there are all sorts of amounts. So, no, I think it took off a lot more than what we originally had anticipated. But it was at the same time we were getting the checking system reviewed, because we'd done some research on the checking running checking accounts and the cost to the bank of running checking accounts. And for every cheque that had crossed the desk, the cost in terms of processing that was $7 to the bank.
Oh, wow.
That's not just processing it, but obviously you've got to keep these transactions on record for 7 years. So high costs. So we were looking at all sorts of ways of reducing the cost for transactional banking. That was our driver. And FPOS was obviously
for those
lead.
that are a little bit younger, the check, we're talking about an actual piece of paper that you wrote on as, I'm
That's
paying you
right.
this much money.
Yeah, I forget the audience probably wouldn't even know what a cheque is today. Although, having said that, my mother had a chequebook in her handbag only 4 or 5 years ago. So yeah, very different in today's world. So that got me to Auckland, and then I started working a lot with the electronic banking providers, the manufacturers of the FPOS terminals, and I got headhunted to work for a company called Intellect. Intellect were a Belgium-based company, and they were manufacturers of electronic banking terminals. So I went to work for them, and they gave me the option of basing myself in Sydney or in Melbourne. I'd never been to Melbourne. I'd only been to Sydney once. So I packed my bag and off I went to Melbourne. And I was the Australasian manager for Intellect. So I was dealing with the Australian market and the New Zealand market. And I bought myself a bike, and I biked to work each day because I didn't really know Melbourne, and I thought it's safer for me to be biking around, finding places than travelling in a car and trying to identify locations, because we didn't have a mobile phone with maps on them in those days.
Yeah.
We had the brick.
Yeah.
So whenever I went to appointments, I'd get a taxi out to my clients. So one of my biggest clients was Coles Myer. And as you know, they're a huge entity in the Australian market, and I worked closely with their IT team, and we were developing turnkey solutions for cash ATMs and transactional ATMs in their environments, in their retail environments. That's across their retail group, including Red Rooster, their fast food chain. So I worked closely with them for quite a few years, and we developed an actual ATM machine to sit within their offices, within their retail establishments. And obviously that was the beginning of the self-styled checkouts that we see today in supermarkets.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Yeah. I worked for them for 4 years over in Australia, and then my life took me to a new opportunity in London. And that was really just to have a bit of a change of scenery. So I went to London and worked in an HR company, not particularly something I would have to say I enjoyed, but it certainly gave me an opportunity to see how UK individuals work. They tend to work hard, play hard. There were many a time where I'd get into the office the next day and some of the team were asleep under their desks because they'd been out the night before.
Right. And do they all just go to the pub at lunch? That's my visage. They just
very
much
so. Very much so. Yeah, it blew me away to see how they work over there. From there, 3 years in that game, and then the Twin Towers occurred, and I remember sitting in Piccadilly Circus in the apartment I had there, and I remember sitting there and watching the footage as the Twin Towers went down, and at the same time, some people who lived over there may recall there was lots of bombings going on in London, particularly in central London, and I lived, as I say, in Piccadilly Circus above a NatWest bank, and there were regular occasions where cars were incorrectly parked outside of the bank, and there'd be the bomb squad have to be called out to see if it wasn't something that was a terrorist activity. So at that point I decided I needed to come home. That big city life wasn't for me anymore. I wanted to get back here. My parents were ageing as well, so it was a good opportunity to get back. And at that point I didn't really have any idea what I was going to do. I met with the ANZ Bank again. They were offering me a role back with them. But I really had a yearning to go out on my own and achieve something and build something for myself. I haven't had children, so I guess Quinovic is my child, as an analogy. And yes, it did a lot of crying and a lot of shitty nappies in those first 3 years. And I wondered really what I'd done. But property management was a relatively new service. A lot of the real estate companies offered property management services, but it was the poor cousin to their real estate sales arm. And I approached the owner of Quinovic, a gentleman by the name of Ross Davey, and long story short, we agreed we'd go into business together, and I opened the first South Island franchise in 2004.
Wow. So up until that stage of your career, it sounded like you'd been doing mainly business to business within a corporate environment.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Very different. Very
stepping
different.
out of that, obviously, what was it? Was it scary doing that, going out on your own? Like you said, the first 3 years were,
It was the valley of death. The valley of death, I call it.
Tell me about those times. Tell me about those initial 3 years, because there are so many people that don't actually make it out of those 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And look, there were many a time where I thought of giving up the ghost. I guess coming from a corporate environment, when you've got a team of people around you, you've got all the expertise within the organisation. For example, you've got a credit division if you've got a bad debt. You've got a HR division if you've got a staffing issue. You've got accounts if there are accounts issues that need to be resolved. So you've got this team of professionals around you that you can rely on. Your focus only has to be on managing your team and managing the sales, and anything that deviates outside of that, you've got professional assistants that can come in and provide you with that information and advice internally. When you go into business on your own, you've got to be all things to all people. So you've got to understand your accounting process. You've got to understand, staff management, or learn staff management. You may not understand it. It's a bit like the old adage, not every player makes a good coach. So you've got to be mindful of staff and staffing issues and personal problems and managing those and staff needs. Because without a good team, you've got nothing. And if you don't value your team, we all know how much it costs to replace people if they leave. You've got to recognise, reward and retain. And I've always attempted to do that with my team. Recognise them for the efforts they put in, reward them for the efforts they put in, and hopefully the outcome of that is you retain them at the end of the day.
I love that. Recognise,
reward
and
retain.
Love it.
So, it was a valley of death. We had issues occur in the Nelson environment with flood damage and properties being damaged, and you're running to keep up and trying to be all things to all people and communicate well so everyone knows what's going on. We had roads that had fallen down and tenants couldn't get out of the property, and how are we going to deal with this? Because obviously trying to get diggers and trucks when, 30,000 other people want diggers and trucks, you've got to pull some strings to get them there. So, there were a lot of times I had staff issues on a number of occasions. And it's fair to say I went through a reasonably high turnover in those first 10 years, partly because, I guess, getting the wrong people for the job, partly people employed for the job that were adequately doing the job, but it wasn't meeting their needs, and we had to agree that there's no point having someone on board the team who doesn't enjoy what they're doing. There's also no point having someone on the team who doesn't actually know what they're doing. And I guess one of the biggest lessons I learned was, this might sound harsh, but when you've employed a lemon, move them on quickly. That 3-month probation period is critical to small businesses, because very difficult to get rid of them after that point. And if they're not doing the job and delivering on the promises that you offer your clients, then they're letting the whole team down. And service delivery on what you promise is critical in my game. It's no longer good to be good. You've got to be outstanding to be in business now.
So in those initial years, you said you went through a lot of staff. You've said maybe they were the wrong fit, the wrong hires and everything. What about your leadership? If you look back and being honest, has that changed?
Very much so.
Yeah,
very much so. Absolutely. Leadership is probably the biggest one, because I think those people who know me personally know that I like to achieve at a high level. I like to deliver on what I promise, and that puts a lot of emphasis on that within the team, and obviously drives their productivity, because they've got other priorities that they've also need to address. And I'm an impatient individual, so that's something I still struggle with today, being patient with people, because it's all very well and good for me, who's been in the business 21 years. I know it pretty much inside and out. But when someone new comes on and new into the industry, there's an awful lot to learn, not only the legislative issues, but the tiny nuances in terms of communication, and even to the level of the words that you use, the difference between the actions that we're going to take and the responsibilities that we've got. They're two completely different things. We're responsible for delivering on our contractual obligations and going the extra distance where we believe we need to. And I think that's one of the things that puts us apart from our unique selling proposition and our unique points of difference. Our people is one of those, and I really focus on that. So as much as I get stressed from time to time, I try and chill a little bit more, because when I get stressed, my team gets stressed. So I'm trying to be a lot more cognizant of that. Even 21 years later, it's still difficult for me to do.
You mentioned when you first got into it, it wasn't a really established market as much
Yep.
as it is today, I presume. Like, what were the challenges without being so established? Was it initial sales? Was it getting your brand out there? What was it like, and how's it changed?
It was all of those things, Mitchell. The first day I started, I sat in the office and worked through what am I going to do to bring some new business in. So the first thing I did was I went and door knocked every single real estate company in Nelson to introduce myself. And those that offered property management service were really quite taken aback. What's this competitor coming to visit me for? But it was more about, there's plenty of business out there for all of us. It was more about telling them about who I was, what I was about, and how and asking them how they found the market, so that we can all work together to achieve good results for the entire market. So that was the first thing. I think some of the challenges obviously were, with such an unusual name, Quinovic, getting the brand awareness out there, who we are and what we do, because we're not like a company that has a tagline that specifically states what we do. So that was a big challenge, was getting the brand awareness out. So there were lots of flyers and lots of newsletters and lots of mail outs that were going out to introduce us. Door knocking. I'm born and bred in Nelson, so that was a little bit easier for me because I knew a lot of people, so I could go out and tell them who I was and what I was doing in Nelson now. I'd been away from Nelson for 18 years, so, getting back on the horse here and letting people know I was back and I was operational in a business was an interesting change for me, particularly given, as you say, it was person-to-person sale as opposed to business-to-business. So I had a service I was offering, but no one knew who I was or what it was about. So making sure that people understood the differences between Quinovic and what we were doing. I was in the fortunate position of a lot of new development was going on in Nelson. So a lot of the apartments around the waterfront, Doug McKee had just set up the waterfront, then quickly followed by Latitude. And that was a Wellington developer that I knew, so he'd set those up. They were all offered, owners or purchasers were offered guaranteed returns on investment when they purchased these properties, but that was counterintuitive to the body corporate rules, which, also stated that they weren't allowed to run them as Airbnbs or short-term accommodation. So when you're promising guaranteed returns and you can't deliver those because of the body corporate rules not allowing you to run the unit like that, it caused a lot of problems. So we picked up a lot of business in that regard.
Yeah, great. Good start.
Yeah, it was. It made it a little bit easier in terms of the entry, because there was a plethora of people needing and wanting these services, and they didn't necessarily want a real estate company doing it. They wanted a company that was purely property management, because these were high-end apartments. A lot of them were furnished, so a lot of the historic property management companies had no knowledge of property management on a furnished property or shorter term accommodation. The model was getting broken to what they understood it to be, and being new to the business, I was happy to be all things to all people. We'll do short-term, we'll do long-term, we'll do furnished. And we became known as a bit more of a boutique brand, and I'm proud to say that I think we've continued that philosophy to date. We do are still seen as a boutique brand. And that boutiqueness is more about the types of properties I'm focused on bringing on board into our portfolio, as opposed to boutique for the clients. It's more about the boutiqueness of the properties that we offer to prospective tenants. They're usually higher end properties.
In the first 3 years, what do you think your lowest point was?
Ooh, I think the lowest point was when we had those floods. When were they? Late 2000s to 2009, something like that. And we had so many properties that were significantly damaged, and tenants that were so incredibly upset and emotional because they couldn't live in their homes. We had the bank come down behind the waterfront apartments, and basically the mud came through all the first level apartments, right through the back door, through into the lounges and out and spilling out over the front verandas, moving tenants on, trying to find an alternative accommodation for them. And yeah, it was bad. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the tenant that lived up in a property up the top end of Hill Street, and it was a private driveway, and the whole driveway collapsed. And then the tenant was threatening to sue us because they couldn't get in or out of the property. And it was like, well, I've never gone through the process of being sued before. Where do I stand? What do I need to protect myself? It could have put me out of business, in terms of the amount of money that could have been expensed in that regard. I guess I found out in the long run that they were idle threats, and there was no really legs to them. There was nothing more we could do than what we were already doing. But when you're under that amount of stress, potentially financial stress, as well as your team being stressed, as well as your tenants and owners being stressed, there's a huge amount of weight on your shoulders. So I think that was probably the lowest point for me. And usually, as I said, when you go back to corporate world, you just bring in all these extras in the organisation to help you out. But when you're in business on your own, even though we had a group office support, franchise office support, it was really legs on the ground that we needed, and we didn't have the opportunity to get that. So we just had to work our way through it. And we got there in the end, but it certainly makes you, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, isn't that what they say?
Yeah, I love it. How long into the business before you made your first team member hire, staff hire?
I went into the business very differently to any other franchise. So most franchises started off with the franchisor, and the majority of our franchisees, are husband and wife teams, so the couples. I started off as what we call a single principal office, but I went into debt and employed a property manager from day one.
Oh, wow.
So that I could do what I do best, which is go out and hunt for the business. And then I would hand over that property to my property manager, and they would do all the detail work. So load it into the system, communicate with clients, meet with tenants, show the properties, get the property rented, and then follow through the process that we do thereafter, which is regular inspections, communications, maintenance, rent reviews, handling the bond lodgement form at the beginning of the tenancy, and doing all the transactional side.
Now, I would believe that would have sped you up, like, amazingly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was the best decision I made, I think. We were the fastest growing Quinovic office in the country. And due to that, I got approached by the franchisor to go and work at group office. And what that meant was I became the national franchise development manager. So I said, look, I'm happy to take that role on as long as I can still be based in Nelson. So I would fly around the country every week to each individual office and assist them in terms of their growth, their sales, any other assistance they needed in terms of marketing. So my role was sales, marketing, and new business, new franchises.
And
so I
where
did
do you
that.
think those people mostly struggled that needed help with?
Business development is I think, in my opinion, I think you've either got it or you haven't got it. And I personally don't believe a really good property manager makes a good business development manager, because business development managers are sales focused. They're focused on the hunt and winning the business and then handing it on to the next person, who then is the detail person, the devil in the detail person. Salespeople, in my experience, and I've had many, many years experience in it, aren't detailed. They're detailed in terms of note taking and all the rest of it, but they then want to move on to the next hunt and the next kill, and they move it on to the next person to deal with all the housekeeping, shall we say.
Probably, if you got ADHD, you'd probably make a good salesperson.
Yeah, well, funny you should say that, because more recently, as a team, we've talked about ADHD. I'm not sure why the subject came up. I wonder whether I am a little bit. And probably, whoever knew of ADHD 20 years ago, but yeah, I think I am on that spectrum. I like things neat and tidy and orderly. I like things planned. I like to, I had a great background in terms of the banking, because file noting meetings, following up after meetings with, further to our meeting, a email outlining what we discussed and what we agreed, but as the action points, so that both parties are on the same page, because things can get missed. So I'm a big file note taker, and those file notes help me in terms of my team when I do a handover, because the file notes are really the recipe for what that particular client wants, expects, and needs to be delivered.
I asked you about the lowest moment, but what about, was there a moment when you thought, yeah, I've done this, I'm happy? Is there a moment that to you that went, yeah, we got this?
Yeah, absolutely. When we became profitable. So obviously, when you start out a business, particularly the mechanism that I chose, which was to go into debt to employ someone, and in my hometown, failure wasn't an option. My pride would never allow me to fail in my hometown, particularly because I knew so many people. So I guess that the high point was when we turned our first profit, annual profit, and I could see that the consistent performance and growth was starting to occur. I think that for me was like a bit of a relief and a bit of a weight off my shoulders, where I'd proved myself.
What year did that happen in? Year 1, 2, 3?
2007. So, year three. Sorry.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Amazing. Now, I guess what's kept you there? You've been doing this. You've been owned the business for over 20 years now. What's kept you here? Or has there been other drivers? What have you been doing? Yeah.
Look, I think from my perspective, it's a great. If someone had said to me, 20 years ago, would you ever buy a franchise? I would have said no. No, because I like control. I'm a bit of a control freak. So I thought, franchise would be too paint by numbers for me. That wouldn't be my gig. But what's kept me here is I had a really fantastic relationship with the then and the current, but the then franchisor, Ross Davey. He was a great mentor. He was no nonsense. I learned a lot from him. And the support that he provided me in terms of my journey in business was fantastic. I think the people that I'm lucky enough to call clients, we've got clients that are still with us after 21 years. And the way I differentiate my business in terms of the people I deal with, I've got clients who are owners and I've got customers who are tenants, and that's how I differentiate the two. We're there to provide an excellent service to both, because without one, we haven't got the other. So, we've, again, got tenants that have been in the same property for 20 years. I think that's just fantastic. We provide homes for people, and, your home is your castle, whether it be a rental property or you own it. So I think, dealing with a lot of those things, there's always a challenge. That's kept me in it, because I do bore easily. So there's always something new to learn. There's always new circumstances. Our first tenant who abandoned a property. Well, what does abandonment mean in terms of the Residential Tenancies Act? Like, how long do we need to leave it empty? So you've got to go and check the RTA and ring a couple of other offices and find out whether they've experienced it. And, to cut a long story short, the answer to that question is when the bed's gone, you can consider it abandoned.
The bed. Okay.
If the bed's gone, you can consider it abandoned, and then and obviously you haven't been able to make contact with them, so then you can start packing everything up, getting it into storage, because you can't dispose of those items immediately, and re-renting it to get some income for owners. But, I pride myself on delivering what my client wants, and that's through good communication with my team as well. So not every client wants the highest return on investment. It's more about looking after the property and making sure that the tenant does look after it. So other investor clients are more driven by return on investment. Obviously, they want the tenant to look after the property, but they're not prepared to take a lower rent to get necessarily what we would consider potentially a better tenant, a better fit tenant. But that's their decision, not ours.
And are there a lot of people out there that go, yeah, I'll rent it myself, and then they rent it, and then they have issues and problems, and then they put their hand up and say to someone like you, help?
Yeah, there are, and that will remain while the stats are still as high as they are. So when I first started, close to 80% of owners self-manage their properties, their investment properties. That's down to, in 21 years, that's down to 68%.
Wow.
I guess it's like the analogy of who would ever employ a lawn mowing service. Well, look how many do now, because, free time is a big driver for people, particularly, the baby boomers. They don't want their time taken up in having to deal with administrative issues. They want to grow their wealth and they want to have more free time to spend doing the things that they want to do. So we regularly get calls from people who have rented the property themselves, fallen short of the law. There's threats from the tenant about what they're going to do, and then they seek professional advice on how they can resolve the problem. We usually then step in. As long as it's a good fit for our portfolio, we will step in, and communication is the biggest issue, and that's usually what the problem is we'll go out and we'll meet with the tenant, we'll listen to what their concerns are, what they feel they need met in terms of issues addressed. We then communicate with the owner and talk to them about what we feel is a recommended course of action, and then we deliver. And then the problem goes away. We make our profit on good quality property management service without issues. So that's what we want to achieve. Invariably, with the size we are now, there are always issues from time to time, whether they be maintenance issues or a tenant thinks that they deserve new carpet, new oven, and the whole house repainted. There's also owners out there that potentially think that they deserve that when the tenant leaves, and that's not really how the law works. So I guess a big part of our role is education.
If you were to jump into a different industry, different business, if I was just to say, hey, you can either focus on price or quality, what would you focus on?
Quality. There's a lot of our competitors at the moment discounting management fees in the market. And look, I'm happy to do that. But as I say to clients, I'm happy to discount my management fee, but what part of the service don't you want? We take a small amount of money over a long period of time, and that's how we don't really turn profitable until month 4, month 5, after we've gone through the initial setup of the new entity and the communication process, which is always heavy at induction time, and then it settles down over the course of the tenancy term. But I'm not in favour of reducing fees just for the sake of reducing fees, because to me that's just a race to the bottom. We provide an incredibly valuable service, and I truly believe that. I mean, how I got to Quinovic initially was they managed my properties when I lived in Italy for a few years, and it was just a great service to know that I had someone on the spot who was looking after my biggest asset while I was overseas, several thousand miles away. So that's what first introduced me to Quinovic and why I first approached them to set up a South Island franchise. So I just think you've got to do what you say you're going to do, and if you do that, I don't think you can go wrong. And make sure everyone's clear. What you said, what they said, what the outcome's going to be, and then aim to deliver on that.
Okay, so you started off your career and it was in corporate, and so you got some really good training. You moved into business. It sounds like you had a great mentor in Ross. how important would you say it is to have the mentor, the coach, the training when you are going out in business alone, wearing all the hats?
I think a mentor is critical because one of the biggest issues I found when I started was you've got no one to bounce off. So, as I said before, I'm a single principal office. So it's not as if I had a partner in business with me, whether it be a life partner, a relationship partner, or a business partner, that you can bounce off. This happened today. This is what I've had to do. Someone else's third-party view on it, who's not emotionally connected to it, is invaluable. So I think having someone external to the business who can give you a fresh helicopter view on things is really invaluable, even if you're on the right path and it's just to bounce something off someone else. I think it's critical, and I think it's certainly helped me in terms of my personal growth, but also my growth in my business.
So if you could actually go back, final question here, if you could go back to your young self starting out in your career, is there anything you'd tell that past self, or some wise advice?
I'm only 34 now. What do you mean, young
26,
self?
was it? Yeah.
I think getting the right advice from the right people, surrounding yourself with expertise. Like even though I had a financial background, I don't enjoy the accounting side of the process. So, employing people who are good in their specific fields and making sure, I guess Ross used to always say to me, make sure you got the right person in the right seat of the bus. And that's lived with me for the last 21 years. That is critical. If you get the person who's got those a specific skill set, make sure they're sitting in the right seat of the bus, because they'll either get bored and leave, or they won't do the job correctly if they're in the wrong seat. So that's always been a good bit of advice. So I think having, I know that this is the service that you provide now in terms of a business mentoring, and I've never used one, but I do think I was fortunate in my business that I had Ross available to provide me that mentoring. I would definitely do that moving forward, because I think it's a stress alleviator, but it's also great to have that fresh set of eyes on the business and a different mentality, to think of things differently to how you think of things. I know what my personality type is, but having someone completely different to skew it a different way and let you think about it in a different way allows you to, I guess, make knowledgeable decisions.
Hey, well, you've certainly brought some golden nuggets of advice here today. You have been around the world with your career and certainly did amazing things. So I really thank you for your time today. And hey, we've just talked business. That was awesome and amazing. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Mitchell. And one thing I would say to end, don't forget to celebrate the successes along the way. I haven't been good at that, and I think that's a really important thing to do.
I agree. Even those small successes.
Absolutely. Not just you, but with your team.
Yeah, too right. Hey,
thanks for the opportunity to have a chat.
Brilliant. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Let's talk small business. I appreciate you tuning in. If you got value, hit subscribe, like, or drop a comment. It spreads the word and might just help another legend get their breakthrough.